Okay, so I wanted to start this show off with an apology to Jonathan David. It was back in the summer I said that he couldn't score for his country and I didn't care if he scored for his club. Well, he's gone out. He scored against Atletico Madrid, Real Madrid, Juventus, and now Liverpool. I feel like he's probably proven me wrong going into episode 211 of Northern Football here. Ben Steiner alongside Brendan Dunlop and Alex Gonke-Ruzic.
Man, I think you should shit on him again. What more would we get out of Jonathan David if you just double down on your doubts?
Or is there anyone else we need to shit on that just needs a little kick or something like that? I mean, or alternative headline, you could also rock with the Jonathan David listens to NFB because he heard Ben and he's just gone absolutely nuclear. So you can also lean into that side of the angle too.
Well, I have tuned into his podcast, so it'd be only fair if he tunes into ours, no?
It's a good show he makes, to be fair.
2025 goals. I think we could get Jonathan David on NFP. Not for very long, but I think we could do it.
We'll ask him about it.
Yeah, well,
do you get excited scoring for club or country anymore when you do it so much?
We'll have to ask him whether he still cares to score for Canada, and I think he will, especially with Nations League finals coming up in March. But we're going to start the show off a little bit differently this week. We're going to start with Canadians abroad because it's been a pretty quiet week domestically. Abroad, there's been a whole lot, though. Another week, more of Jonathan David calling me silly. He scores against Liverpool, of course, in the Champions League, adding to just that long list of big clubs that he scored against. Unfortunately, Lille lost 2-1 in the end with a red card and some mistakes that undid them, limiting their chances of qualifying directly to the round of 16. But they still have a chance against Feyenoord next week. And Brendan, I know Feyenoord has, been in a little bit of controversy over the last little while, and especially this week as well. We can get into Bayern and Davies and Bayern versus Feyenoord as well. But with Jonathan David, Alphonso Davies, Feyenoord, it's been an interesting week in the Champions League.
Yeah, I mean, what's great is that the Champions League weeks now, which are longer and spread out, the European week is longer and spread out. There's something for Canadians every day. It's Wednesday, Celtic are playing shortly after we record this, and then on Thursday, Stefan Stakio's Porto play. So it was pretty cool to see the hype and the attention and this happened in 2020 before the pandemic when Alphonso Davies went to Chelsea in that I think it was last 16 tie that Bayern had against the Blues, and that was like his announcement to really English speaking, and by English speaking I mean the English and European media, that Alphonso Davies is a star. And Jonathan David didn't necessarily have the same type of performance as Alphonso Davies did at that moment. I think a lot of people though are much more aware of who Jonathan David is, and the fact that he broke a drought, a 7-game drought, which I think was starting to weigh on him a little bit. And you'd see some of the haters, even some Canadian fans, that would point out like, well, it's these inconsistent runs here that he goes on, and this is what the big clubs are watching. Big clubs are absolutely aware of, which is why no one's put a real offer on the table yet. Scoring in Anfield goes a long way. There are a lot of players, both domestically or in European competition, that have scored at big Premier League grounds like that and earned themselves big moves or big paychecks. And we all believe that Jonathan David will do that. The question is where and when, and whether someone puts a pre-contract in front of him. One of the rumors that we were running with on Canadian Soccer Daily this week was from the Chronicle. Lee Ryder in the Newcastle Chronicle said that the Magpies were presenting or going to table a pre-contract offer or looking to do that for him to get him to sign as a free agent. They've got their own financial fair play issues. So Newcastle's an interesting team. We all know that Jonathan David has these dreams of playing in the Premier League. He's scored at big Premier League grounds. He's scored against the biggest teams in the Champions League this year. He is of that level to make a move to a bigger Champions League club or a move to the Premier League. And I'd love to see it happen. We're just going to have to wait and see when and to where.
Man, Isak and David would be incredible together. But I just want to say,
Isak's not staying though. Come on,
hey,
David's there as his replacement.
If they keep him, Isak runs the channels. David kind of plays off of him there. I'm sure Eddie Howe could cook up something nice there. If he wants to compete in the Champions League, you can't lose a guy as good as Isak. So we'll see how the season goes, I guess, on that one. But I just want to say about this Champions League. Is it safe to say Jonathan David is the big winner of the format change? Because, in a normal year, you play like the last time he was in the Champions League, they were in a bit of a weird group, Lille, where they had Sevilla and a couple other clubs I can't remember off the top of my head. Wasn't anything major. Then he went to Chelsea, home and away. Didn't get to do much in that round of 16. Then they were eliminated. This year, I mean, you got to go up against Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid, Juventus, Liverpool, like heavy hitters, heavyweights. You got to prove yourself. You got to score against all of them just to show off. I mean, on one hand, this kind of shows this new format. I still don't know how to feel about it because I think I like it. I think it's safe to say I like the concept. I don't know why they think they need 5, 6, 7 teams from each of the big 5 leagues. I think if anything, what Alil has done has shown like, why not some of these clubs outside the top 10 in the coefficients? Like imagine some of these smaller other European clubs. But David, big winner of this new format change, and I think his new contract will reflect that.
Are you including Lille though as one of those smaller clubs, or like who do you have in mind?
Well, I just think it's like Lille being like a fun underdog story, or Aston Villa, because I'll use that as an example. Like it's cool, but at the same time, it's like that's the team that made it by finishing 4th, 5th in the French league or the Premier League. Would it not be cool to maybe let some of the 2nd or 3rd place teams in smaller leagues, for example, or there's some leagues their champions don't qualify. It is the Champions League after all, not the 5th place league. I have found that a bit annoying that, like, for example, this year there's the race for the coefficients again, and it looks like England's going to win and there's going to be 6 English teams. That feels like a bit of a waste of this new format. By adding more teams, you don't actually help those around Europe, you just help the big groups, but to be expected knowing UEFA.
Yeah, I mean, I've always found it silly that when you have 3 competitions, if you allow 6 teams into the Champions League, you're effectively allowing, half your league into European football after the trophies as well. That you need to focus a little bit more on the teams that actually earn their way into it. And that's why I do like the idea of, a proper Champions League. And that's how the European Cup used to be, well before, our era, Alex. But that is how I feel the Champions League should be.
When you read in your history books about the European Cup competition, last time
bring back Red Star Belgrade champions, and remember when Romanian teams were winning the Champions League?
Well, like those are the teams that should get into it. Like if you win your league, you should get into it, and then you can fill out the rest with 2nd, 3rd. But it should be at least the number 1s across the board. And then you can go into the coefficient because it's not even the number 1s across the board. And that's where the format still fails me, even though it has provided a little bit more entertainment, I think, because of this new league structure.
I think they've figured out like a bit of a balance. And, if they give 6 spots to England, what you'll see is that 5th and 6th team will rotate. And you've seen it over the last couple of years. Newcastle finished top 4 a few years ago. Aston Villa finished in the top 4. Both of them are within the reach of finishing top 4 again, although that's probably unlikely. If you get 5 or 6, it's not just the same 4 or the same 6 anymore. And that's certainly been the case in Italy, where I feel like there's been some good rotation, and now to a point where Atalanta are one of the 5 teams that you expect every year that become a big 5. Maybe Bologna will be able to stick around in that mix as well. What surprises me is that you have nations like the Netherlands and Belgium that the champions playing qualifiers. Like I get that for Celtic because they're the only team from Scotland. They have to run the gauntlet in qualifying. Their Champions League season starts in June. I do understand it for a league like that, but for Belgium and the Netherlands, I just find it there's a weird kind of discrepancy in how those leagues are valued. When Portuguese teams were reaching the Europa League final all the time, not winning the Champions League, just reaching the Europa League final, they had 3 automatic Champions League qualifying teams. Passos Ferreira were like finished 4th in the Liga NOS, and they got to play in the qualifiers. I'm like, that's nuts. Like it seems imbalanced. So I do actually think in a weird way they have balanced it better than the previous iteration.
Well, it is still weird because there's that drop off. Because like if you're the 5th team, which I think is our 5th country, which is France, you can still get 4 teams, which is a pretty big deal. Then if you're the 6th country, which I think is the Netherlands, it drops down to like 1.5 because you get 1, and like the other team has to go through qualifiers. It's like, is there really that big of a difference? Since I know Netherlands and France have flip-flopped a few times in the coefficient over the last few years, you're telling me that they go up a few points in the coefficient, that all of a sudden one country deserves 4 teams and the other deserves 1.5? Like, why not just make it like 2, 3 each, right?
But Jonathan David, of course, he might not be at Lille for long. Mayan Zilberstein asking, what are each of your guys' preferred destinations for Jonathan David's next club? Ideally, some somewhat realistic options, but it's up to you guys, Brendan.
Honestly, I'm not hating Newcastle. And that was a rumor 2 or 3 years ago. I kind of feel like that was a rumor when Eddie Howe arrived, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe I'm going too far back now. It's been a few years since I guess Eddie Howe has been in that job. But once they got the money, it seemed like that was a kind of a natural link. And there'd been, Arsenal, United have been thrown out there. I think that United would be tough as much as, we talked here. I've said here, I would have really loved to seen Alphonso Davies go to Manchester United. That would be really tough for Jonathan David. Different player, different expectation. I don't think he'd succeed. Several very good players have gone there and have been absolute failures. I think that would be really difficult for him. But Newcastle's not a bad shout, man. More so than Barcelona. I think Newcastle would be good. In Italy, the way he plays and the way that league has meticulously evolved in terms of speed and play style, I think he has the opportunity to be very successful. But I don't know if he'd be able to do that walking into an AC Milan now, which seem to be, a machine that are a piece away from being a Champions League contender, not just a Serie A hopeful. I know AC Milan are a little farther back in the title race than they would like to be. Napoli was a rumor as well. I don't know if that'd be the case. I want to see Jonathan David in the Premier League, but I think one of the top four, what we would call perennial top four clubs, might be too big a jump.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that Newcastle shout as well. It was a few years ago that, they got money, and once you saw them potentially, outspending some of these big clubs, they put themselves in those races for some of the best young players in Europe, and Jonathan David was among that. Of course, in Lille's title-winning season, he was among that, and he's continued to score for Lille in these big environments. That I think a club like Newcastle would be the one. A club like Nottingham, though, has interested me to just get to the Premier League, but they're not playing the level of football that Newcastle is and that Newcastle aspires to, Alex.
Well, yet, because now they're top three in the Premier League, and they're playing incredible football. That's think form. Jonathan David could fit in that system. I mean, Chris Wood's been having a phenomenal season, but he's like 33 and he's been overperforming his XG by like 4 goals. So he could be due to this is an unbelievable heater, but maybe unsustainable. So I think for Jonathan David, now that he's entering a free agent, I just can't help but think he's destined for Premier League or Spain, because I love the Italy shouts. You've heard it before. Like, I'd love him to go to Inter, AC Milan, Juventus, but that felt like a right move for 22 Jonathan David, like still 22, 23 years old, still maybe hasn't proven himself as much, still has a contract. He'd make a lot of sense for like a 30, 40, 50 million buy. He goes there for a few years and then he's 27, 28. Then he makes his Premier League move or his Real Madrid move or Barcelona picket. But the fact that he's waited and he's become a free agent, it opens up the doors to like Spain, right? Barcelona, we know they're in financial trouble. I'm sure signing a free agent would be a good way to help some of that load instead of paying 60 mil on Dani Olmo like they did, nearly getting themselves in trouble for it. I know Real Madrid always loves getting guys on frees. And then the Premier League, Brendan, you mentioned something very interesting, the financial rules where, Forest did get dock points last year. Everton got dock points. There's a lot of talk of Newcastle struggling to sign guys, Manchester United, Chelsea, a lot of these clubs in weird situations. Being able to sign a forward who can give you 20, 30 goals, or at least has done that for Lille over the last few years, there could be a bidding war for Jonathan David where a bunch of them maybe inflate his salary, put it over a 6-7 year term, get him on a free because they can save some money that they might otherwise have not gotten, especially with how the striker market is. Like if I'm Arsenal, for example, Gabriel Jesus, another major injury. They've had a lot of struggles with their forward line. Like David would slot in perfectly with a healthy Bukayo Saka, and they've been linked to some interesting forward profiles like Mateus Cunha. So I think David to the Premier League just makes so much sense, and you can make a good argument right now for Arsenal, Chelsea, Forest, Newcastle, any of these teams that end up in the Champions League next year.
It's funny you say Arsenal because I think a lot of Canadian fans would be excited to hear a big club like that. I still think that there is a heightest bias when it comes to pairings in attacks in the Premier League, and Bukayo Saka is obviously the star of that team, the person you're building your squad around. He's not the tallest guy. He might be slightly taller than Jonathan David. Not that Gabi Jesus is a particularly tall player, but I do think that it's hard to look at that team being better than they currently are if you bring another smaller forward to play alongside Saka. As unfair as that might be, and maybe I'm totally wrong, but you don't see that small frontman pairing very often. And even though the game has changed and evolved, particularly in the Premier League, and it's far more technical than it was before, you still just don't really see that. Like, I don't even know if that's the conversation that they're having in the war room at Arsenal. Is like, yeah, but then where's the height? What are we doing? What are we doing for height? If
See,
he's
that's why they're linked to Benjamin Sesko, the Slovenian guy. He's a big guy. He definitely he ate his his Slovenian food growing up. He's like 6'4", and maybe they've been listening to you on that.
I think, you know what, Forest is a really good shout. They have to make the Champions League to be in that conversation, absolutely. But based off of fit, I think that could be a really good one. And my prediction would be that Jonathan David would go to Forest because Chris Wood has gone to Wrexham, who've been promoted to the league championship. That's how
Goes from scoring 15 in the Prem to Wrexham. I'm curious to know how much McElhenney and Reynolds would be putting up for that in terms of salary. That would be definitely some championship waves.
They make the jump. They're paying. They know that. I think, to be honest, I think the Wrexham are worried about jumping too quickly. And the great reference here to Jonathan David. I think that's weighed a lot of his decision making, or some of the I think at least in the conversations that he may or may have had with other clubs, or in terms of pursuing moves before. I think he missed his chance to move to AC Milan or Serie A. Alex, I think you'd said 22 Jonathan David, that was it. If he had gone to AC Milan this past summer, Paulo Fonseca is still in the job. I don't think AC Milan may be title contenders, but guaranteed they're not as dire as they are. And Paulo Fonseca still has that job if Jonathan David had gone, but they both missed it.
I don't know whether CONCACAF Twitter could deal with Christian Pulisic and Jonathan David on the same club team. That might just burn everything down.
But in CONCACAF debates, we're gonna gone crazy.
How many 51st state conversations are you ready for, boys? Jesus.
Well, if you're looking for a tall forward, there's a former DC United Academy player that is not playing anymore that could be available. I say tongue in cheek, of course. Baron Trump was a member of the DC United Academy team back in, I think it was 2017. I think
I wonder how much of a deep cut is that, or am I just like not in the circle here?
There was a video that went around on Twitter of like he is 6'8" Donnie just roaming around up front, like Peter Crouch-esque, kind of funny.
So, but his growth was in the Biden tenure, wasn't it? So what year was he in the DC United Academy?
I think it was like 2017. He was in a different academy as well. I think before. I think he was in the Red Bulls Academy. I think before, and then like he can play. I don't think he's playing anymore, but there's some video out there, and he actually had some skill to him.
So Pulisic is MAGA Messi, then Barron would be MAGA Crouch?
Something like that, yeah.
MAGA Mertesacker, something like that.
That's a good one. I'm a big alliteration guy.
Yeah.
Wrong position, but I see the vision.
Yeah.
Well, just trying to think of tall guys. But another transfer saga that we can jump into, of course, Alphonso Davies. All the talk about him potentially moving to the Premier League, Manchester United, Real Madrid, various other clubs around the world. Seems like it's over because he's probably going to stay at Bayern Munich.
Exciting. I think this is exciting. I think it's something where with Davies, we've said it from the start. There was no real losing in this scenario, right? Like you go to Real Madrid, what a move, what pressure, what opportunity. Maybe you go to the Premier League, always nice opportunity as well. But like, I think what's been forgotten in this, we're always so excited for change and new opportunities and new things that you kind of ignore what's going on. And I think the reality is being at Bayern Munich, that's still one of the comfortably on their day top 5 clubs in Europe, and depending on how they're feeling, they can be the top club in Europe. Who knows, if they go on and win a Champions League this year, you can have that discussion very comfortably. And the fact that Davies is such a key piece there, he's marketable, he's got a lot of importance to the club on and off the field. Vincent Kompany's come in and loved him, and he's fit perfectly into this rebuilt Bayern team that are maybe a bit better than some thought they would after last year's disaster. Like, this is a great chance for Davies to stay and really become a Bayern legend. Like, the reality is he's quietly been at the club for 6 years now. He's won it all, but he wants to win it all again. Like, there's no reason why he can't do that. And I'm curious to see his development now, because there has been a trend of guys like Joshua Kimmich and David Alaba who have evolved as players. Remember when Alaba was a midfielder and became a fullback, center back, all that? I'm very curious to see what Davies can become, because I think it's staying at Bayern, what he might have missed out on a Real Madrid move, he can make up for by growing as a player. And I think there's a real chance to do that now that he's staying.
Do you think he moves if the World Cup is not in Canada in 2026? I was thinking about the back and forth and the drama about him leaving, and then for him to sign now. Okay, Bayern love to do their business kind of earlier in the year, and this is late for Bayern Munich standards, even to do it here in January, 6 months before it expires. But you don't want to have that much the potential for that much destabilization ahead of what could be the biggest marketing moment in your life and in your career. And you think about Kylian Mbappe's move, which really hasn't gone how people expected. And if France was hosting the World Cup this year, or be it next year, I wonder if that would have played a factor as well. Because I just, for the longest time, I felt like, okay, his head's been turned. He doesn't really like it there. He doesn't want to be, a 10-year guy, which could quickly happen. He wants to try new challenges. And then seeing David hasn't moved, and players, I don't want to say stick to their comforts, but maximize the situation that they're in. If it's just the factor of Canada hosting the World Cup and the increase in added attention that he will be as very much the face of the team and the face of the national team when the world comes, maybe factored into the fact that he thought, you know what, I got it pretty good. Let me just maximize as much money as I can get here, but it's not worth shaking the boat and risking a big change.
I think what you can't ignore in this is he loves Bayern, because I think this is something where this wouldn't be happen if he didn't love the club, because I think it's something where you have a chance to leave on a free. He could have very well taken it. His form, he's done what he needs to do. Where last year there's discussions of, do Real Madrid even want him? His form's dropping. What happened to Davies of a few years ago? Now he's back up there in the discussion of best left back in the world. He has the freedom to move, and the fact that he stays is telling that, yeah, I like what this club has built. I like the city. I like Jamal Musiala, who he's obviously close with, a lot of guys on this Bayern squad. He's become a leader. There's a world where maybe Davies starts to wear the armband in a few years, which is crazy to think, but he's been there that long. And if a Neuer moves on, if a Kimmich moves on, that possibility is on the table. I think it's important to know that he just, he loves the club, and what that allowed him to do is you almost get to use Real Madrid as leverage. Like, okay, if Bayern doesn't want you and they don't offer you what you're worth, you can go to Real Madrid. But the fact that Bayern stepped up and realized what they were doing, it ends up being a win-win for both club and player.
Yeah, I think the disappointing thing in my perspective is that he's not going to necessarily develop more as a player. He's reached incredible heights already with Bayern Munich. He has a position at Bayern Munich. He's a left back. He's an attacking left back. He can play left wing back, but he's not in that attacking space that maybe he would have gotten the chance to at Real Madrid or Manchester United or one of these other clubs that we had heard him linked to. So I think it's a little bit disappointing that he's not necessarily going to take that next step because it is a more comfortable situation, but he also doesn't have that risk of that next step not working. We know that left back at Bayern works, and it will continue to work unless something goes tragically wrong.
I'll say, keep an eye out, though. Vincent Kompany keeps playing him a lot more in the center. Like, every time you watch him, he's a little more in the middle, playing a little more almost like a midfielder in possession. Maybe that's the evolution. Like, you've seen that happen with different players at Bayern.
You think I've thought about this as well, because I think we had the conversation about, him pushing forward. Is that something that could happen if he went to Real Madrid? And I said, no, absolutely not. I couldn't see that. But there's a couple other clubs, even Bayern, where I thought maybe he goes back into a traditional, more forward position. But yeah, with the departure of like Kimmich, maybe that is kind of the evolution, especially while he still has his legs. And we assume that this deal would take him through to 2029, another 5-year deal. So again, ahead of the next World Cup, which he'll be 30 in Portugal, Spain, Morocco, and the 3 South American nations. Are we going to say all of their names? Like, it's long.
It's insane billing.
It was great when you just say USA 94, France 98. Now you're like 2026. How much time you got? Like, it's too long to list.
United 2026. It sounds like a political party.
Yeah. Yeah. I struggle with that. I'm glad you said that, because I've struggled with that forever. I don't know how to write it. I don't know how to. United 26, that the bid was ridiculous. And yes, it does sound like a political party that you'd be afraid of. But yeah, 2030 seems worse. I really like that shout, man. I have one more prediction for you. This is what I think will happen. He puts pen to paper on this deal now. He stays. And Bayern are doing some kind of, not last minute, but it's in the summer. It's July. And Manchester United are, haggling over somebody that they want. And Bayern goes, yeah, you can, okay, fine, you can have this player. Maybe it's not Kimmich, but somebody. But they're getting Xerxes back for nothing. And Xerxes and Fonzie are very, very good friends. and Fonzie's going to be there for a long time. And I think you'll see, we often see this, the LeBron effect, where players want to have the people that they like around them. So I think Xerxes will be one of the first people that you see come in, and I think that will have a lot more to do with Alphonso Davies' influence rather than perhaps his on-the-pitch form.
And another Canadian that might be on the move, Tajon Buchanan, of course. He's strongly linked to Torino and Roma per various Italian outlets, at least on a loan. But Inter don't seem to want to let him go. They potentially want a replacement for him, even though he doesn't play a whole ton for Inter right now. It's a bit of a peculiar situation for Tajon Buchanan, but do you think he moves at sometime soon, or is he just going to, stick it out at Inter playing these 10-minute cameos at the end of matches, Alex?
I like this idea of a 6-month loan. I think this is a good balance, good compromise to what was mentioned, because I still think he has every reason to stay. I think, again, the line in the sand I've drawn is this summer, preseason, avoid an injury. Maybe you go to the Club World Cup, get some minutes, get some confidence, because Inter is going. But this is a nice compromise where it's a good level. Like, yes, Torino, it's a drop down to like the middle of Serie A. Roma have struggled this year, but you're still in Serie A, so you're getting used to the league. You're still learning the language. You're getting used to all the cultural stuff. You get 6 months, and then you kind of get, because I know in the Torino case, they were floating around an option to buy. It's a good win-win, because either you impress so much at Torino, they buy you, and maybe that's a good level. Like, it's not like he's dropping significantly to a league well below his level or a team well below his level, or he impresses so much, Inter's like, oh, we want you back. This is why we signed you. This almost gives him the adaptation period he just never got due to injuries and the timing of his signing. So I'm good with either one. I think Roma probably draws a little more attention because they're in Europe, more minutes for him. But Torino as well, it's a good opportunity to play in a beautiful city too as well. Turin is.
My worry with Roma is that he ends up in the same kind of high pressure situation that he's in at Inter now, which is a little hotter because Roma aren't performing as well as they expect to be. So I fear that he'd be kind of repeating the same situation, albeit these 6 months he could get a good run out there, and if he stays healthy, he could make a big impact and have kind of the same impression. Torino's a better fit. They're not in a relegation fight. They are kind of middle of the pack, but I think he'd be able to find his footing in that league, in that place very well, as opposed to like a Como, which seems to be linked with everybody who have these Wrexham-esque ambitions of staying up there forever, and they've had a hot season. They'll probably stay up and be relegated next year. I think that would be equally to Roma, a bad situation for him. Torino's not the worst. I don't know if I love the idea of him going there permanently, though. Inter bought him because they wanted a replacement for Dumfries. And there's probably 3 other positions now where they realize that Tajon's of value to them. So I don't think that they want to cut the cord just yet, and I think it would be premature for them to do so. But Torino now for 6 months, I like. Permanently, I don't.
And Nathan Saliba is also rumored to move to Frankfurt, as per Tony Marinaro. Thoughts on that potential move? That's the question from Johnny Depp is, should he take a chance and move to get that experience or just stay in MLS?
Yeah, it's he's had his, he's been a very confident and vocal guy for the most part. And there's certainly been stories about his ambitions and wanting to go to Europe. I think if there's an opportunity there, he absolutely takes it. It just seems like one of those guys that, bets on himself, believes in himself, and wants to prove himself. I do have a bit of a fear that it might be a move a bit too soon for him. Last season, there was a couple times in our group chat where I was like, man, Saliba's not at this level. And then I was proven wrong later in the year where he was very reliable, or even sometimes there's no same games that I was chirping him for making bad decisions. He'd go on and assist, or he'd do something incredible. And that's part of being a young player and learning and developing. There's definitely a risk with going abroad too soon, but he's a player that has a lot of quality. And I think, a player that seems in the situation right now, particularly with his international situation and his relationship with Jesse Marsch, where I don't think he'd go off the rails, if things went poorly or he struggled a bit overseas. And these young players always have options. So it doesn't mean it would be forever, right?
I think Frankfurt's an incredible club to go to, like straight up, right? Because just look at the development they've done. Like they develop players and still win. Like they're a team that's comfortable selling Omar Marmoush for 75 million euros. Shout out to Marmoush, by the way, because he was once upon a time Canadian eligible. Of course, he chose Egypt. But imagine that. We have there's a Canadian player because he still is Canadian. You don't lose that playing for Manchester City. But you only think what he could have done with Jesse Marsh at a 2022 World Cup. But Frankfurt, they've developed guys. Marmoush, Kolomuani, they sold 70 million. Luka Jovic, remember that once upon a time when Real Madrid came calling for 50 mil. They develop players, and I'm excited because I think Saliba, they would have a plan for him. I think there'd be an opportunity for him to grow. And if he goes now, there could be a situation where maybe he goes for 6 months, sees the level, gets a taste of it, and then next year he goes on loan for a year, maybe at a level just below, and then he goes to the 2026 World Cup, does well. Then Frankfurt give him his chance to start. And then in 2 years, you're talking about a player who is 40, 50, 60 million elsewhere. I think there's a good timeline for all that. So I would love a Frankfurt move and following that sort of template where as long as they don't drop him in too quick, but that's why I like it being Frankfurt. They're a club that's not irresponsible that way. They want to develop talent. And I think that's exciting that such a promising one like Saliba's linked to there.
And Jaquil Marcheruti is also linked to Vitória de Guimarães, where he can link up with Dio Mercy Michel. CF Montreal is reported to be asking a €3 million fee. And Brendan, how did I do with the Portuguese pronunciation
It's
today?
funny, you stumbled on the Vitória, but you got the Guimarães right.
So focused on that second part.
Well, that's great because that's all that matters. Yeah, it's a tricky one because like Vitória Guimarães, the club, because like Sporting CP, that we all know them as Sporting Lisbon, or forever it was Sporting Lisbon, and now they're pushing the brand of Club de Portugal, Sporting CP. But yeah, you're not wrong to say Guimarães. That's the city that they play in. I think that'd be a good move for him. Different from Saliba, I think that he's trialed in Europe many times. He's had that opportunity or that I should say expectation put in front of him at a very, very young age. He's not taking as big of a risk in his career at the moment, I think, in taking a jump and a leap like that. And Portugal's like a good league. We've certainly seen it on the women's side, but on the men's side for developing players or finding your feet in Europe, they're a big club, but not one of the big three. The pressure situation would be different there for him. Much like it was, playing, it'd be more equivalent to playing for one of the three Canadian clubs as a Canadian player than, playing for one of the bigger clubs in Europe. I think Guimarães would be a really, really good spot for him. I'll be honest, I haven't followed them closely since Ricardo Quaresma left. But I think that'd be a pretty good spot to, earn your stripes in Europe for Jaquil Marcheruti.
Well, I mentioned for Saliba that if you were to go to Frankfurt, he should go on loan this summer of 2025. And if I say that, I'd say the level he should go to is Portugal, Netherlands, Belgium. So for a player to go straight there, no issues. You've seen what Tejan Buchanan did with it. You've seen what a Stefano Eustáquio, right, where he goes to a Pacos and then he makes that move up. I think for Marcheruti, this move would make a lot of sense. You got to link up with another Canadian and Dio Mercy Michel. I think if anything, the one thing I do worry about is Montreal, deservedly so. Like they're asking for a reasonable fee. They paid like a lot of money in GAM. I think they see a profit there to be had. I just wonder if Vitória de Guimarães will pay that for a player who's still young, who's maybe a bit unproven outside of MLS. So I think it's something where I'd be curious to see where the negotiations go in that sense. I feel like that's going to be the bigger holdup because otherwise the move makes a lot of sense.
You guys would love this coming from me. Okay, this is a great NFP deep dive. Jaquil Marcheruti could be a case study where we talk about or try to define the Alphonso Davies effect, because I agree with what you said, and Guimarães would be looking at that kind of an unproven Canadian who, he's been a professional for many years, but he doesn't have a lot of appearances under his belt. He doesn't have as much experience as years on the resume. He would go for a fee like that, I think, because, and it would, to me, it shows that these European clubs see a value in Canadian players that no longer is underpriced, is more, I think, more reasonably priced, and that at $3 million for Jaquil Marcheruti now isn't an overpay. Whereas we see, some of these American players move for transfer fees that are overpaid. Josh Sargent went to Norwich for, it wasn't a lot of money, but I don't think he's lived up to that. Pulisic's on a huge wage. Yunus Musa, both those guys are playing, I think, to those their salaries now and perhaps those deals. But at the time, like, it was their passport that was earning them that fee or costing them those clubs as much as it was. So we're seeing that shift with Canadian players now.
Another fun one as well is Jovan Ivancevic, who we've spoken about on the podcast as a potential Canada dual national, has just moved to Bologna on loan. He'll join their Primavera squad, their under-20s, already making his debut today with eyes jumping up to Serie A, a huge move for a 20-year-old center back, Alex.
Yeah, this one's super exciting. So we've mentioned him a lot. I was keeping an eye on him in Croatia, and then he kind of fell out the squad the last few months. I didn't see much of him, which is too bad. I want to get a closer look at what he could do. But no, all of a sudden in January, this move comes up. Bologna takes a look, and this is exciting on a lot of fronts because the Croatian league, I mean, they pump out talent. We know that. You see it all the time if you pay attention. Like a lot of these, Belgium, Netherlands, Portugal's, and smart top 5 league teams are starting to hoover up talents from leagues like Croatia and Bologna. They've done a lot of smart business as of late in terms of their transfers, finding young talents and moving them on. So I think this is, you look at all the aspects of the move, the fact that he joins right away on a loan. He's already dropped into their youth team. Like he literally made his debut today in the Primavera. Then maybe in the summer they sign him permanently. He gets a chance to make the preseason. Like I think this is a super exciting move. So definitely one to keep an eye on because he's done well to impress in his short time already in Croatia, the young Canadian.
And from TFC Milan fan, update on Steven Vitória. Is he still playing in Portugal regularly? Is he close to retirement? Furthermore, what do you think the chances of older established Canada vets like Vitória or Borjan coming in back home to play in the CPL or, even getting back in the Canada at some point?
I can't see him coming back to play in the CPL. I think the CPL, to its credit, has moved on from being that league. Marcus Haber played, Nick Ledgerwood played in those first couple of seasons. I think Haber thought maybe he could restart his career, maybe even get back on the map. The team seems far past that now. But for Vitória, I think it's unfortunate for Vitória and Borjan that those guys didn't get a real, kind of retirement send off. Atiba's was totally botched, but Atiba got it, right? And a different level, of course. I think Atiba deserved that. Maybe that was guaranteed that Atiba was going to get that. But I think that those guys kind of deserved a real send-off too. And I don't think that they're going to get it, which is really unfortunate. Vitória never didn't seem to be able to bankroll his international success in those few years there as Canada qualified for Qatar into a bigger club opportunity. And once Qatar happened, I felt like that wasn't going to happen for him. The fact that Steven Vitória is not back in MLS even kind of surprised me. And he had such a short spell with the Philadelphia Union before even declaring to play for Canada.
I can really picture him playing for Charlotte FC. I don't know why I can picture him playing with Tim Ream at Charlotte.
For the Philadelphia Union,
but he could play at Charlotte.
He's had that experience before. Vitória's an interesting one though, because his contract ran out last June and he hasn't signed with the club since. So you do wonder if he will sign in North America now, because it feels like if he doesn't, he's going to retire, because you're not going to wait that long at that age. He's 38 now.
But are MLS clubs signing a 38-year-old center back?
That's why I don't think it's going to happen in MLS either. But I think CPL, there's no reason why not. And that doesn't mean he has to come in and be a 28-game guy for Valor or something. But there's a lot of value in what he could still bring as a 10, 14-game guy. You saw when Daniil Henry came into the league. Didn't Dejan Jakovic get a stint with Forge in there for a while? David Edgar. I still think Vitória could bring similar value where you saw it even as a year or two ago. For him, what had left him is his legs. There was still class there. Maybe if he plays in a system with less running, a bit of a lower block for a younger team, that the fact that he'd come in, he's been at a World Cup, he brings experience, I think, and he's recognizable, right? In the sense that he was part of that Canadian men's team that kind of came onto the map a few years ago. I think there would be value for a club to make that signing, and I think ditto goes for Milan Borjan. If anything, teams have a legit shot of Vitória because he hasn't signed for a club for 6 months. Borjan's the interesting one because he's out there in Saudi living his best life, putting up 8 ratings on FootMob every week, playing against superstars, probably raking in a good salary. Yeah. It's going to take some convincing to get him out of that, whereas I think Vitória, there's more of a tangible chance.
Borjan's probably on the highest salary of his playing career, and he's at a team in Riyadh that nobody even knows, and they're called Riyadh.
I'll Riyadh even.
And from Doublet, where do you guys see Kwasu Poku playing next year when he's back from injury? Does he spend another year for Molenbeek or it look to move on? I think because of the injury, he has to spend another year at Molenbeek because there just wasn't that example of what he can do over an extended period of time. It was really quickly that he got injured, almost similar to Tejan Buchanan to Inter.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Go ahead, Alex.
Oh, yeah. No, it's just unfortunate, the injury, because he showed enough glimpses where it's like, all right, he scored a couple nice goals. He's getting regular minutes. But then the injury just throws it off because you're missing half a season. You only have half of that season of Europe under your belt. I think it's something where you get another year in Molenbeek. But what's nice, say if you really come out the gates the first half of next year, and then you're on fire, maybe a team will give you a chance in the January window, and that's the way to go. So I think for Poku, just focus on your recovery and really go strong the next year. And I'm sure there'd be a lateral move up to the Belgium First Division if teams will be paying attention, or other clubs.
Yeah, that's a great shout. I think, for us seeing these young Canadian players get these opportunities, we're very quick to look at these leagues as just stepping stones. But the reality is, they're running full businesses with competitive teams with goals, and they buy these players looking to achieve those. And for Molenbeek, promotion is one of them. I think another season, he's not hurting himself by putting in and digging in to have a full proper season. So I'd like to see that for Kwasu Poku.
Yeah, it wasn't so long ago that he was in the CPL, that still having that building block coming back from an injury, I think, is still important for Kwasu Poku. But jumping into the Canadian women's national team as well, Olivia Smith scored as Liverpool looked to hit a good run of form after a spell of losses, beating Brighton last week. Fun fact for Smith, her goal was the first WSL goal of 2025 as Liverpool opened the weekend with a Friday standalone match. And Jade Riviere had an excellent game at right back for Manchester United in a big 4-2 win over Manchester City in the derby. Her stock has quietly been rising lately as she established herself nicely when healthy. And Clarissa Laracy is also off to the WSL, joining last place Crystal Palace. They're currently 1 point in the relegation zone behind Leicester. And a bit of a longer Canadians abroad today. It really took over our show, but a busy week in terms of Canadian international stars, especially in the WSL.
It's a dream show for you boys, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm always love the Canadians abroad. I mean,
of course,
that's what Saturday morning, it's my routine. You wake up, throw on a tea, because I'm not a coffee guy. Fun fact about me, I haven't had coffee in like 3 years since I lived with Ben. I just don't have it anymore. So I'll throw on a little tea on the kettle.
That was 2 years ago, but
yeah, I mean, relative in it. And then I open up my iPad, because I like to be one of those dads who, I know I'm not a dad, but I like that kind of dad vibe of like flipping the iPad on and just like, you think of like you walk into your kitchen, your dad's just watching the iPad with his glasses. That's me, but with like some, I don't know, Croatian league game or Liga. I love Marseille. They play at really good times, and I wish more clubs would play at Marseille, where it's always 11:45 Pacific time. It's kind of my Saturday morning, so I'm always down to talk Canadians abroad.
It's funny. You know what I was thinking about? The Canucks do this a lot. I don't know if they still do it, but I remember being at Sportsnet and always being like annoyed that they would have a 7 p.m. Sunday puck drop, and some of the dads would complain. And we live in Toronto. Why are you getting upset what the Canucks are doing scheduling, apart from it affecting us working late at night? They'd be like, they're not thinking of families. You can't be taking your kids to a game at 7 p.m. on a Sunday. Mondays are important. You start the whole week. And I never really understood that before. And now I understand that. And I think that I definitely think that about like La Liga and Marseille always play at 2:45 Eastern, right? But that's 8:45 there. Like, what? Are Mondays just a wash? Not just for families, but for everybody?
I mean, we were complaining about 7:30 kickoffs in MLS being too late on a Saturday night.
Yeah.
But have you seen the Marseille crowd? That's not a crowd you're bringing a baby to, by the way. Just the way it's just a bunch of dudes screaming with flares. But
yeah. And the more I learn about Marseille, the more I realize that just because the shop's open at 9 doesn't mean it's a full-fledged running legal business at 9 o'clock.
This is still a country, France, that like has a Wednesday off, and like, work culture is very, very different than let's say it is with Canada, where even if you go to a Canucks game, you're expected to show up like punctual for your 9 to 5 the next morning and get in the train and all that. In France, a little of a different culture, and I think it shows sometimes in the football.
Yeah. I'm a sicko though. You guys are like a new age version of it, but I was that person that would watch Premier League all Sunday morning, You take a bit of a lunch break. I'm watching some NFL to start the 1 o'clock that I'm betting on, and then whatever Serie A or La Liga game is at 2:45, and then La Liga at 4. Like I was dialed into that, and so I don't have that time for that anymore. But I feel like what's replaced that is if there's a Friday 11:30 MLS kickoff, I am down for that. I am, especially if I'm home. There's a very, very good chance I'm catching 90 minutes of that.
Big Colorado versus Portland guy at 11:30.
I feel like I get pretty lucky. I always, I get one of the Cascadias, or like I feel like LAFC play a lot of those.
The NWSL is really good for that. Actually, I really appreciated that they put a lot of Friday kickoffs. It was like perfect. Like you'd finish work around 5. There'd be some like Chicago Red Stars or Chicago Stars as they're now called for some reason versus like Racing Louisville game, and you just throw it on the iPad. Just kind of a kickstart for your Friday. It's like still 5 o'clock on the West Coast. Maybe you're going out. Maybe you're going to go play football or something. It's a nice like in-betweener. I really like that.
I didn't realize Chicago dropped the red. I don't know if that has something to do with them trying to disassociate themselves from potential associations with Red Star Belgrade or the Republican Party. I feel like it's
all of the above. All of the above. And they're still not the worst team name in the NWSL. That goes to Boss Nation FC.
Yeah. They're kicking off this year, right?
Well, next year, but they're getting rid of Boss Nation. I think they realized their mistakes because that was definitely one to forget.
They're going to come. They're going to come back with something else, though, right? Like the New England Revolution could not start today. Like they couldn't found the team with that name today. People are like, oh, celebrating the revolution, eh? Let's go back through the real history instead of what's told in the history books. Like they wouldn't be able to get.
They would just be called the January Sixers if they ever did that.
But to be honest, I feel like Boston's going to change the name and make another misstep. Like it'll be something that you're like, we really want to be associated with that, like the Boston Tea Party or something. There'd be something that they think is unique and better than Boss Nation, and they're just stepping in it again.
Yeah, I just hope they do a little bit better job with their launch video this time, rather than completely forgetting the Boston Fleet PWHL team in a case that said there were too many balls in this town. So let's add a women's soccer ball. It made no sense, that whole launch. But I guess we'll see how they fix that before they kick off. But on the Canadian women's national team players that found success over in the WSL, your thoughts on that, Alex?
Yeah, no, I think for the 3, shout out to Olivia Smith. I thought her goal was incredible. Shout out to Ben. I'm surprised you didn't talk about it because I saw on your Strava you were biking while watching the WSL game, and I was hoping for some pointed analysis on Olivia Smith's positioning underneath the striker and the run she made on the goal. But just a great performance all around, and she's just finding her feet nicely with Liverpool. Jade Riviere, enough said. When it's her, it's health. You really want her to get a run of health, and I do wonder maybe this run with less Canadian games might actually help her. She's not jetting across the continents because it feels like there's been a few times where she'll come play for Canada. She'll play really well, pick up a knock, and it'll affect her at club level. Because for her, it's just about getting consistent reps. The talent. It's been there since she was at college. And it's just so exciting to see her dominate a derby game like this where people are noticing like, wow, Jade Riviere, like in a game where there's a hat trick, a lot of big stars, Jade Riviere is the name you're talking about. And as for Clarissa Laracy, the last one, I'm a bit torn on this move because I think it's exciting. She's going the WSL, but this does scream a bit of what happened to Sarah Strategakis last year. I think it was when she went to Bristol City from Sweden. Bristol City got relegated. Strategakis, ends up moving on, and you're kind of wondered, was that the best move? If Palace stay up and Laracy sticks around, great. But if they do go around, I feel like given what she's proven in Sweden, I think she could have stepped up to maybe a mid-table WSL team instead of going straight to the bottom.
Yeah, having said that, if she can, bag a bunch of goals, regardless of whether they get relegated, there's always eyes on players like that. I think the same thing happened for Deanne Rose when Reading got relegated, right? If it wasn't for injuries, I think there would have been a few more teams lining up to sign her as well. So I think it's a good opportunity for her to prove at a higher level what her level actually is.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I do like the move for Laracy. Crystal Palace is not far off. They're 1 point in the relegation zone. It's only one team that goes down. And so, there's still a good chunk of the season left that they can make up 1 point and rise quite a bit from the relegation zone, especially if she can hit a run of form and start bagging goals for Palace. So it'll be interesting to see if they do go down. But I would gather that at least if she hits, okay form, that they're able to stay up, because they're just so close. It's not like they're 3 or 4 points back and need to climb a mountain to stay up.
No, for sure. I think that's reasonable. Just depends on if they fall in that. Because I happen to Strategakis, very similar situation. She played really well for Bristol, but that relegation does throw a wrench. And I just say that just because, like, the Swedish league's a good league. Like, this isn't some youngster making a jump up from an NSL, say that's maybe a bit unproven, or even like a Portuguese league. Like, the Swedish league is established and have shown that. That's why I am surprised. Like, I would have thought Larissy's stock would have been a bit higher than a Palace move. That's what I'd say. It's still a good move when you factor in those other opportunities.
Also a busy time for the women's game in Canada. Of course, the NSL continuing to build. Quinn signs with the Vancouver Rise, finally becoming official. Probably the biggest signing of the league so far. Desiree Scott also comes out of retirement for the Ottawa Rapid just hours after our last episode of recording. And from WSoccer.ca, would love to hear you three rank the NSL squad so far based on depth and quality. I put my 6 together. I've got Vancouver at the top, Toronto second, and Montreal third. Vancouver, I think Quinn is a difference maker there. With Toronto, the internationals, outstanding. You're seeing players that are coming over with World Cup appearances. You're seeing players that are coming over from the NWSL. And then, of course, you got Emma Reagan as well. And then decent prospect, 18-year-old, comes out of 1 year of college, April Lantine. I don't necessarily know what her impact is going to be in the league with just that 1 year of college in a league that's going to be a little bit older, but that's exciting to see a young player like that sign in the league. Montreal, I think it's all down to their internationals, but I really do like Megan Sauvé, former Montreal Carabin, coming back. She was outstanding in U Sports, and I think could really hit the ground running in the NSL. And then I finished my list with Calgary, Ottawa, and Halifax. Alex,
I think very reasonable list. I think I wouldn't disagree too much. I think for me, Vancouver is number one, and they've been number one. And I think the advantage they had is the academy. And I think we'll see it with some of the young players they sign up, like just having that depth in a year one, like the fact that if you have any injuries, you can just call up these players playing together regularly. They did lose some key pieces from their academy, like I guess shout out to Geneva Hernandez-Gray, because it was made official an hour after our last recording that she's officially going to Sporting. Great move for her. She's using that Portuguese passport to her advantage. Shout out to Jamie Perreault, who moved to, I think it was Norway, was it, or Denmark, one of the two. Great move for her as well to make that jump. It's too bad because I thought those two really would have done well with Vancouver. But despite that, there's a lot of promising players still coming through the academy. And the fact that you add in a Quinn, like this, a Quinn, someone who has shown over the last few years that they're at the NWSL level as like a very good midfielder. They've shown it with Canada. That's a coup for Vancouver. You look at some of the other players, like DeFilippo is a bit of a sleeper pick. Like, I really liked her, and I thought she was going to be in the national team fold with what she was doing in Spain. So the fact that Vancouver were able to land her and a few other vets, that's a huge advantage. I would say Montreal I'd probably put second, just because I think they've done a good job of quietly picking up some really top-end players. I do worry about depth, but sometimes it's the hardest to get those top-end players. They'll find a way. There's enough talent in Quebec. Toronto, I really like the build as well. Emma Reagan was probably the big coup. So I think that feels like the big three now. And I'd be curious to see if that's how it plays out. And then in terms of the bottom three, I'd probably agree with Halifax at the bottom. But I think Ottawa's experience, while I know, maybe you wonder if it's too much experience and not enough youth, I think experience in a year one league will pay off. Having Desiree Scots to show you the level of work ethic of all these things will push in Ottawa to be higher up and maybe even help push some of the big three that it feels like has been established so far.
Yeah, we talked on this show a few times, and when they became a free agent, I think we all expected that Quinn would sign in the NSL. We just wondered where they would go. Vancouver seems to me like, I agree with you, the strongest lot in the group, which we expected because of the academy. But I think Quinn really makes them a force, the Rise. So I'm excited to see how that team blossoms there, because there's a part of me that's disappointed that Christine Sinclair is not on the pitch. It's really great to see that Desiree Scott is going to give it a go and will be for Ottawa. I think that's a great signing for the league, and I really hope for her that she can string some games together and really enjoy the experience. It'll be a very, very unique experience, and we all assume this this will be her last club for Desiree Scott. So it'd be really special if she can have a full year there and help bring this league forward and make a big splash, because it seemed like a bit of a slow start when it came to these player announcements, but as we're getting closer, there's real reason to be real excited about this league kicking off, and I think it's exactly 3 months, right? Or a few days short of 3 months time.
Yeah, still a long way to go in terms of building the league. I think Halifax only has, 5 or 6 players signed officially and publicly at this point. Several players have signed and they've not necessarily announced them. That's not just Halifax, but clubs across the league have signed a lot more players that haven't been announced. Vancouver's been running tryouts this week as well at UBC. So they're getting a look at quite a few of the UBC Thunderbird players are out at that training camp or tryout camp. So I do think that there's a long way to go. One thing that does concern me is the name of Ottawa Rapid, because we saw in a lot of the Desiree Scott interviews, in a lot of the different various media that came out about that, we saw Ottawa Rapids, Rapid Ottawa, Ottawa Rapid. Like, there's not a consistency there in terms of Rapids, and it's so easy to say Rapids because that's what your default would go to. So I do wonder whether there's a tweak there, but that's a very small, like minute little complaint, I guess, that I would have. But I
lean
get
into
it.
Rapid Ottawa. I think that would be just lean into the French name, and I think that actually might be easier.
Yeah, well, when they're playing their games in Gatineau, because they found a better situation playing stadium wise, then maybe that'll be it.
And the CPL also with a bit of a busy week as well. News is quietly heating up as Calvary and Forge begin prep for the CONCACAF Champions Cup. And shout out to Calvary for drawing 1-1 with LAFC in a match that produced some good CPL marketing because Olivier Giroux was playing in that one. Forge have also signed 2024 Player of the Year Brian Wright and Dan Nimick, but face controversy with star Benny Badebanga and have lost pieces such as Alessandro Hajabapur and Garvin Matusla, and probably the most complicated names in the entire CPL to say all in one sentence there. Thank you very much, Alex. But Badebanga seems a little bit like Tristan Henry 2.0, Brendan.
Yeah, it does, which is really disappointing and surprising because we think of Forge as being this force, and they make so many decisions that they get right. The Tristan Henry one was seemed like a bit of a blemish the way that it went last year, albeit they were fine in goal. But Badebanga is a different player and a highlight reel player, and to not have him would be a big loss for the league. And I think that they might find him a bit harder to replace than some of the other key players that they've had to fill the shoes of over the last few years. I think Badebanga is a hell of a CPL player, and it'd be a shame to not see him in the league.
It's a bit unfortunate, but I guess it also shows the ruthless edge of winning teams. Of you go through this sometimes where it's like if you're surplus to requirements, or if you feel like for whatever reason you can upgrade, you do it. But you don't want to see it end with a guy like Badebanga, because ultimately he was the perfect player for a CPL, like immensely talented, but importantly, like entertaining. Like this guy will nutmeg and make life's miserable for fullbacks. He will score goals from halfway. He will entertain. He will play football the way it's meant to be played. These are guys you want to keep in the league. And certainly if they leave, that happens. That's business. There's been a lot of great CPLer guys that you would have loved to stay around who've left, but you want it to be on good terms. So I am very curious to see how this one rolls out, especially after the Tristan Henry situation just didn't really reach a conclusion that I think either party would be happy with, especially Henry. Same goes for Badebanga, because he's a fun personality. If you've had the chance to talk to or interview him, like this guy just he loves his football. He loves doing his thing, and hopefully they can find a way to make this ending a little more amicable than it seemed when those reports first came up.
And York have also been making some moves and signing Adonijah Reed, Stefan Yates, Riley Ferrazzo, and Gabby Bitar. Seems like they're picking up everybody that's out of contract in the CPL or paying transfer fees in the case of some of those. Ottawa have a new coach in Mexican Diego Mieja, who joins from FC Juarez. They also signed Mexican midfielder Juan Castro from Atletico San Luis, who, of course, they've had a bit of a partnership with under that Atletico Madrid banner. Valor's quietly wheeling and dealing, bringing in Rocco Romeo and Chris Twardick. Romeo, of course, going back to Valor after a spell at the other VFC in Vancouver. Halifax have a new number one in Ryan Yesley and have also signed Isaiah Johnston. Isaiah Johnston returns to the league after taking a spell down south of the border. Is this good or bad that we're seeing a player like Isaiah Johnston, still young, return to the league, Brendan?
I think it's good. I mean, I think it's we all expected that there would be CPL players that look at the USL as a step up because the salaries are better. But maybe the quality of play isn't actually the level that they were looking for, or it isn't the fast track to MLS that a lot of players go for. So I don't think there's any fault in coming back. I think he's probably on a contract that's better than the one that he left, which is all progress and steps for young players and part of the building the ecosystem, right? So I think it's good to see him return. Some of the York moves stand out to me. Like, I'm a big Gabby Bitar guy. Obviously, I think it's great to have players with international experience at this level, particularly when that international experience is not with the Canadian men's national team. So I like what Mauro Stacchio and York are building.
Big Arab Cup guy.
Huge Arab Cup guy. I mean, hey, commentated it, and it was a fun tournament. Shout out to it being free on YouTube. Got to watch some of those games. But
just for the record, that was the Asia Cup.
Well,
The Arab Cup is at the end of this year back in Qatar, and Habibis, I would love to be back there. I really, really hope that I get the call up to go back.
Hopefully, but Batar gets a call up too in some form.
He'll be there, man. He'll be there.
Participate. But yeah, Johnson's it's a tough one because I think on one hand, and you kind of feel that sentiment, you want those guys to go succeed because it's more CPL stories. And I think especially the fact that he went to a Huntsville, right? Like, he was there in the Nashville system, and you see what's happening with Rubens Pasillas, where Pasillas looks likely to maybe make that jump up. You would have hoped Johnson could, because Johnson was a fantastic player to watch in the CPL. I really enjoyed him. That game against the Whitecaps was huge for him, where he balled out at BC Place, scored. You would have thought he could have leveraged that into more. But like you mentioned, it's not the worst thing if he tries a USL and he picks a CPL. And I think Halifax, it's an exciting opportunity, especially with Ryan Yesley. That's another great move. And you kind of wonder if that's the move Yesley should have made last year and just not have gone to Ottawa in the first place. Like, Halifax has clearly got eyes on big things. They also re-signed Lorenzo Caligari. Like, Patrice Geyser is not happy with the year they had. If they can have a good year, maybe this is what a Johnston needs, a Yesley needs to make that step that those guys have shown they can maybe make, but that they haven't. And I guess the good thing is with guys like Johnston returning is you learn where guys should go. Like, what are the right moves for guys? Because it's a new league. You're learning, like, okay, a Marco Bustos didn't work out the way you thought it would. A Tristan Borges didn't, but a Joel Waterman worked so well. A Lucas McNaughton. Okay, there's some difference between center backs, attackers. Where should the attackers go next pro, right? Pasillas works out. Farsi works out, but it doesn't work out for other guys. It is helpful that you're getting these sorts of data that's going to help teams, especially when you hear Vancouver and some of the rumors of guys they're about to sell, and you're excited to see how that's going to go.
Here's a bit of deep CPL analysis from me that will surprise you guys. I watched Isaiah Johnson quite a few times pitch side there at York in his last season. And what really stood out to me was he seemed like the type of player that connects and works really well with other highly skilled and highly talented players, of which in the CPL, there's always a mix. And I just felt like to the naked eye, it seems like, oh, this guy's really a partnership guy. Like, he was always looking for Babuli, and he was always looking for Ozaze. And 8 times out of 10, he would connect with them exceptionally well. That wasn't always the case with the players around him that were not at that level. So I wonder if that has changed in his game as he comes to Halifax now. At the same point, having Caligari there, who I think is an exceptionally talented player, I wonder if that becomes his prime partnership, or the person he's looking to play with the most, or if his game is a little different now and a bit more inclusive. So I'd be curious to see how he fits under Patrice Geyser's system, because I agree. I think that Halifax didn't come anywhere near close to the level that they'd expected, and what Geyser's been able to build there this season is a team that is expecting to be in the playoffs.
We've got some breaking news to us. Podcast listeners will, of course, know it, but Luke Singh joins York United on a 2-year deal. So he comes back to the CPL as well. Your initial thoughts on that?
Good for Luke Singh. I think it's something where you saw understandably he was trying to stick it out with TFC. I just don't think it worked. Luke Singh is too raw of a player, but I think CPL has been a good spot to develop. You've seen it. He's come a long way since his days of FC Edmonton. Remember when he had that year there in 2023, I guess it would have been, or 2022 it would have been. It was my first year covering the league. I got a lot of Edmonton games, got to see a lot of Luke Singh balling there. I think you saw with Ottawa last year with Didic and why Tier Walker ended up being preferred. Like, Singh has a lot to work on his game. Like, he's got all the tools, speed. He can ping the ball 50 yards. He can make these wild flying tackles. It's just sometimes as a center back, it's how do you turn your loud attributes into quiet ones, right? The best defenders you don't notice. But I think with York, there can be a good opportunity to do that. Noah Batney, for his age, does a lot of the quiet things right, and I think could show the ropes, so to speak, to a Luke Singh, and they can maybe form a good partnership.
Center back is such a difficult position to play, right? And you look at how many very good defenders that the Canadian game has produced, or how many very good Canadian center backs there are in the CPL, for example, but how few make it to that next level, right? And we all can think about Lucas McNaughton. But the CPL players that have tried to make that MLS jump or have flirted with it and just don't quite stick, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just that seems to be the position, unlike goalkeeper, for example, which North Americans have been exceptional at for 3 or 4 decades. It does feel like center back is like the last major hurdle for the Canadian player to truly crack. Do you know what I'm saying? Because you think about some of the very good central defenders that haven't progressed past the CPL. Julian Dunn, not a central defender, of course, but a defender. Caden Chung is another player that I think we all thought, okay, this guy has a lot of the tools. Is it enough to stick around? And for those guys, it wasn't. And I throw Luke Singh in that category as well. So that's not a bad thing that the CPL is his level, because I think he could be one of the best defenders in the league this year.
Well, Brendan, just to that point, because it's interesting, I think there needs to be focus with the youth of making center back fun, because the reality is so many of the good center backs, like even Derek Cornelius, this guy was a striker till he was 19. Moise Bombito was a winger when he was like 19. Right? Like these guys don't take to the position very early. It ends up happening later in the career, especially now as the positions evolved. It's more fun. You can score goals. You can be on the ball. It's not like 20 years ago where it's just you hoof long balls and you do headers. Like, who wants to do that when there's striker, when there's winger? I think it'll be interesting, that evolution of kids growing up wanting to play center back. And I think that's actually, like, shout out to guys like Virgil van Dijk. Like, they've made the position look sexy, look fun for young guys to grow up and play. Because I don't think that's always been the case for Canadians like myself. I can never say I wanted to play a center back when I was younger. I always wanted to be the forward. You'd always kind of would have to fill center back as a position. I think that's going to change. Like, kids are going to look at those guys like, I want to play center back. And so hopefully for Rock's sake, just because of the headers, maybe he picks a different position. But if he does play center back, you can tell him that it can be a fun position to play.
Yeah, my fear is that, because I am very slow, as you both know, is that he won't have the speed. He'd have the size, maybe a bit more of the waistline girth than you want from a center back. But we'll see. I do have this feeling that it feels like he's destined to be a hockey goalie. It kind of feels like it.
Good luck with your equipment costs.
Oh my God, I know. I'm gonna need to pick up another podcast, boys.
Pacific also signed Ronan Kratt and Aiden Daniels as they look to rebuild their attack, while they're set to bring some of their 2021 title winners back, with Caden Chung officially returning and Marco Bustos rumored to be coming back. And Vancouver is also set to sell Grady McDonald to Club Brugge in a big transfer, and James Cameron is also set to move to the Colorado Rapids. What to make of some of these upward moves from Vancouver FC, Alex?
Yeah, this is exciting because, I mean, Vancouver FC, they made an investment in young talent in year one. And at times you can wonder if they did the best approach of getting these young talents, right? You think of TJ Tahid and et cetera. But the reality is they've given these guys minutes. And the fact that Grady McDonald is looking at a move like this, like, is immensely exciting. Like, Club Brugge to be going straight into the CPL, that's big. Especially, you have to wonder, like, the success they had with the Tejan Buchanan. I know Bruges have looked at other Canadians in the past. Like, this is good for the pathway. This is good for the pipeline. And this just shows, like, I think this is so exciting because there's a lot of Grady McDonalds out there who are maybe in academies and they're thinking, like, I'm 16. Am I ever going to get a shot in MLS? Or should I do this route so I avoid some of the, like, the Bombitos or the Oluwase's or the Jason Russell Rose who got there, but they didn't get there till they were 21, 22, 23, 24. Can you make this move early where you avoid falling in that MLS trap? And I think McDonald is going to open the door for more. So I think that move is super exciting that he was able to do it. And the James Cameron one's quietly just a fun story, because this is a guy at 18, didn't even know what he was going to do. His dad, like, pushed him, like, go do this trial. And he's like, are you sure? Will I even make it? He makes the team. Now, 2 years later, he's on trial with the Colorado Rapids. He did all those trials in England last year. like, I think this move will be super exciting. I think James Cameron, with the growth he's shown, like just how much he's grown technically, I think this will be a move where he'll develop, because Colorado's proven to be patient with their youngsters. And I think if he starts with Rapids too, there'll be room to work up. And they love their Canadians. They signed Sini Watutha. They had Moise Bombito, of course. They also got Kamani Stewart-Baines. So they'll definitely get the chance as a Canadian there, where you might not always get that at other U.S. clubs.
Talk about age and opportunity as well. He's going a few years younger than Mo Farsi went to Columbus to try his luck with Columbus Crew 2. And we see how, amazingly well Mo Farsi has done in MLS. And has he earned himself the Algeria cap yet, or no? He just declared
he has.
Algeria.
He got I think a cap in AFCON qualifying, which was pretty cool to see for his perspective.
Which is pretty amazing for him. So yeah, I don't want James Cameron to go play for the Titanic. One day he can develop into further develop into a great player that's we're talking about as being on Jesse Marsh's radar. But seeing these players get some bigger shots to some bigger clubs, reference Club Bruges there. I've said this, you're going to see connections to Marsh's network look at and give Canadian players opportunities. Maybe it's just trials, maybe it's these young players on reserve team contracts that are a bit low risk, but like you're going to see, I think, kind of more and more of this. And okay, Bruges is not like a direct contact, but the network for Canadian players will grow considerably over the next little bit. And I'm excited to see these Vancouver guys get that. I mean, Vancouver's built that as well. Rob Friend's been on record talking about that before the partnership with Bochum, that these are the things that they were looking to build to help create a pathway. I don't know if you're going to see players going to Malaysia now, but the pathway has grown for these CPL guys, and it's pretty cool to see quite a few young players all from one club get these new bigger opportunities.
That's all we've got for episode 211 of the Northern Football Podcast. Alex, I'll see you on Strava. Brendan, maybe on outdoor rink sometime in Toronto. But that's all we've got for this week.
When it's not minus 40, buddy, we can make that happen.
It's a little bit cold. I'll say that. That's why you haven't seen me a ton on Strava, Alex, over the last couple of days.
Weather here is great. That's it. I can run with shorts, t-shirt. Sun's out again for like the 7th day in a row. Come on, man. It is what it is.
I got a big
gray
head.
And it's about minus 20 here. So
yeah. At minus 20 might be the actual temperature, but to me, like if the wind chill, if it says feels like, that's the real temperature. I don't need to know that it's 3 degrees based off of your scientific measurement. If it feels like minus 21, it's minus 21. Don't even tell me the real temperature.
That's all we've got for this week. Make sure to subscribe, you can watch us, of course, on the 90th Minute YouTube channel, and then the podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll be back next week.